before this life?
His name is Samuel, 5 years old. Bright eyes, sandy brown hair, a thoughtful disposition that makes him seem older than his years. He lives with his parents in a suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His mother, Rachel, first noticed something unusual when Samuel was barely 4. The child had found her herbal tea collection in the kitchen and was arranging the boxes with surprising intensity. "Chamomile for fever and agitation," Samuel said, his small voice matter of fact. "Willow bark for pain, mint for the stomach. But you need yarrow too, Mama, for the bleeding." Rachel smiled, charmed by her son's interest. "Where did you learn about herbs, sweetie?" Samuel looked at her with confusion, as if the question made no sense. "From my shop, Mama, from when I was the apothecary, before I was Samuel, when people came to me for remedies because the doctors couldn't help them all." The statement sent a chill through Rachel. Her 4-year-old had never been exposed to herbal medicine. They didn't watch historical documentaries. Their home had no books about colonial healing practices. But Samuel continued, unprompted. "My shop was on Market Street, in the city, the real city, the old city. I had jars of herbs on shelves that went to the ceiling. People came when they were sick. Especially when the yellow sickness came. That's when everyone needed help." He looked down at the tea boxes, his small face troubled. "So many people died, Mama. The fever burned them from inside. Their skin turned yellow like old paper. They bled from their mouths. I tried to help them. I made remedies. But the sickness was too strong. And then I got sick too." Rachel felt her breath catch. Her 5-year-old son was describing symptoms of yellow fever, a disease he'd never been taught about, using clinical detail that seemed impossible for his age. Over the following weeks, Samuel's statements accumulated. He spoke constantly about the yellow fever time and my apothecary shop. He described the symptoms of the disease with medical precision. He named herbs and compounds used in 18th century medicine, bloodroot, mercury preparations, laudanum, sulfur fumigations. He drew pictures of his shop, a narrow building with large windows, shelves lined with bottles and jars, a counter where he would mix remedies, a mortar and pestle, brass scales for measuring. "I lived upstairs," Samuel explained, pointing to his drawing. "Above the shop, I could hear the bells from the church, and when the sickness came, the bells rang all day, every day, for the dead." Rachel's husband, Michael, a history professor at a local college, began paying closer attention. His area of expertise was American Revolution era, but he knew enough about colonial Philadelphia to recognize specific details in his son's statements. The 1793 yellow fever epidemic, the worst epidemic in American history at that time. Nearly 10% of Philadelphia's population dead in 3 months. The city's doctors overwhelmed. Apothecaries working desperately to provide any relief they could. But Samuel was 5 years old. How could he know this? One evening, Michael tested his son. He showed him images of various plants, mixed together some medicinal, some common garden varieties. "Can you tell me which of these are medicine?" he asked carefully. Samuel studied the pictures. Then, with confidence that startled both parents, he began pointing. "That's feverfew, for headaches. That's comfrey, for wounds. That's digitalis. But you have to be very careful with that one. Too much stops the heart." Michael checked his son's identifications. Every single one was correct, including the warning about digitalis toxicity knowledge that even medical students might not immediately recall. His 5-year-old son had just demonstrated pharmaceutical knowledge from the 18th century. Michael made a decision. He contacted Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a colleague in the psychology department who had published research on unusual memory phenomena in children. Dr. Chen arrived at their home the following week, ready to document what Michael had described as impossible historical knowledge in a 5-year-old. What she would discover would challenge everything she thought she understood about memory, consciousness, and the boundaries of human knowledge. Dr. Chen spent the first session simply observing Samuel play. The child was articulate, friendly, entirely normal in most respects. But when she gently guided the conversation toward his memories, something shifted. Samuel's vocabulary changed. His cadence became more formal, almost archaic. He spoke about medical practices with a precision that seemed to come from professional experience rather than childhood imagination. The physicians use bleeding and purging, Samuel explained, his 5-year-old voice carrying unexpected authority. They thought yellow fever was caused by miasma, bad air from the docks. They were wrong, but they didn't know that. They bled the patients until they were too weak to survive. I told Dr. Rush that the bleeding was making people worse, but he wouldn't listen. Dr. Chen's pen froze. Dr. Rush, Benjamin Rush, one of the founding fathers, the most prominent physician in Philadelphia during the 1793 epidemic. Famous or infamous for his aggressive bleeding treatments. "You knew Dr. Rush?" she asked carefully. "Everyone knew Dr. Rush," Samuel said simply. "He was treating hundreds of patients. He believed he was helping. But I saw what happened. The people he bled heavily died faster. The ones who came to me for gentler remedies, herbs, cooling baths, fluids, some of them survived." Over the next 2 months, Dr. Chen documented everything Samuel said. She followed rigorous protocols, asking open-ended questions, never leading, always verifying details independently. Samuel described daily life in 1793 Philadelphia with startling accuracy. The location of buildings, the names of streets, the routines of an apothecary's work. The specific symptoms of yellow fever, high fever, jaundice, black vomit, hemorrhaging. He explained treatment protocols with technical precision. Peruvian bark for fever, jalap for purging, mercury preparations, vinegar fumigations, cold baths to reduce temperature. "The sickness came in August," Samuel said during one session. "The summer was so hot. The mosquitoes were everywhere, but we didn't know they were the problem. We thought it was the air from the rotting cargo on the docks. Everyone fled who could, but I stayed. The sick people needed help." Dr. Chen cross-referenced Samuel's statements with historical records. The 1793 epidemic began in August. It was indeed a hot summer. The prevailing theory at the time blamed miasma from rotting coffee cargo at the docks. The mosquito vector wouldn't be discovered for another century. A 5-year-old child was accurately describing medical theories from 1793. Including theories that were wrong, but wrong in precisely the way 18th century medicine was wrong. Michael, using his access to university archives, began researching Philadelphia apothecaries from the 1792, tax records, city directories, death registers from the epidemic. Then he found it. Nathaniel Thornton, apothecary, shop located on Market Street, died September 1793. Age 34, of yellow fever, contracted while treating patients. The historical record was sparse, but what existed matched Samuel's descriptions: the location, the occupation, the circumstances of death. Michael's hands trembled as he showed Dr. Chen the documents. "There's more," he said quietly. "I found a letter in the Historical Society archives, written by Nathaniel Thornton to his sister, dated August 1793. Right as the epidemic began." He read aloud, "The fever has come to Philadelphia with terrible fury. My shop is besieged daily by the desperate and dying. I do what I can with remedies, though I fear the physician's bleeding treatments do more harm than good. Dr. Rush means well, but his methods seem to hasten death rather than prevent it. I have resolved to remain and do what good I can, though many are fleeing. Someone must help the poor souls who cannot leave." Dr. Chen looked at Samuel, who was quietly drawing at the table. The child had just described, in his own words, the exact sentiments expressed in a letter written 230 years ago by a man who died before Samuel was born. "How is this possible?" Rachel whispered. Dr. Chen had no answer, only evidence that kept accumulating, defying explanation. Dr. Chen arranged a visit to historic Philadelphia. With the family's permission, she would take Samuel to the locations he described and document his reactions. They started on Market Street, in the historic district. The buildings were different now. Centuries of change had transformed the colonial city. But fragments remained. Old foundations, street patterns, the general layout Samuel had drawn from memory. They walked slowly, Samuel between his parents, Dr. Chen filming with a handheld camera. Samuel stopped suddenly at a corner. "Here," he said with certainty. "My shop was here. This is where the door was. The windows were bigger then. People could see the jars inside." Dr. Chen checked her research. Historical maps indicated an apothecary shop at this precise location in the 1790s. The building was gone, replaced by modern construction, but the records confirmed it. They continued walking. Samuel pointed to locations and named what had been there: a tavern, a printer's shop, a church. Dr. Chen verified each claim later. Every identification was accurate. At the old city cemetery, Samuel became quiet. They walked among the weathered headstones, many from the 1793 epidemic. The death dates told the story: August, September, October, 1793. Sometimes entire families within days of each other. Samuel read the names softly, then stopped at one particular stone. "I knew him," Samuel said, pointing to a marker for Thomas Wilcox. "Died the 12th of September, 1793, age 47. He was a carpenter. He came to my shop when the fever started. I gave him bark and tried to cool the fever. But he died anyway. His wife came to thank me, even though I couldn't save him. She brought bread, even though she had nothing." The specificity was haunting. Dr. Chen made a note to research Thomas Wilcox. If he existed, if he was indeed a carpenter, if any record connected him to Nathaniel Thornton. At the Historical Society Library, they accessed preserved documents from the epidemic, death records, personal letters, newspaper accounts. From 1793, they found a journal entry from a woman named Margaret Wilcox, widow of Thomas Wilcox, carpenter. In it, she mentioned bringing food to Mr. Thornton, the apothecary, who tried so hard to save my dear Thomas and would accept no payment for his remedies, though he had so little himself. Samuel's statement, given spontaneously at the cemetery, matched a primary source document written 230 years ago. Dr. Chen sat in the archive room, staring at the faded handwriting in the journal. The evidence was becoming undeniable. This child knew details that existed only in obscure historical documents, documents he'd never seen, written by people he'd never met, describing events from centuries before his birth. Back at home, Samuel drew more pictures: the interior of his shop, the specific arrangement of jars and bottles, the brass scales he used for measuring, the mortar and pestle he worked with daily. Michael found an 18th century illustration of a typical colonial apothecary shop. The layout matched Samuel's drawings with remarkable precision. But the most compelling evidence came unexpectedly during a visit to a medical history museum. Among the exhibits was a preserved collection of 18th century apothecary tools and medicines: glass bottles, ceramic jars, brass implements, dried herbs. Samuel walked through the exhibit with growing emotion. When he reached a particular bottle, dark glass, cork stopper, labeled in faded ink, he stopped. His eyes filled with tears. "I had one just like this," he whispered, "for the Peruvian bark extract. It was one of the few things that helped with the fever. This bottle, it's exactly like mine." He reached toward it, then pulled back, his small hand trembling. "I remember filling it, measuring carefully, writing the labels, hoping it would save someone, anyone." He looked up at his mother, tears streaming down his face. "I tried so hard, Mama. I tried to save them, but so many died. And then I got sick too. I felt the fever burning. I knew what was happening. I knew I was going to die. But I kept working as long as I could. Someone had to help them." Rachel held her son as he wept not for his current life, but for a life lived 230 years ago. For the patients he couldn't save. For the epidemic he couldn't stop. For the death that came despite all his knowledge and compassion. Dr. Chen documented everything: the recognition, the emotion, the impossible knowledge. A 5-year-old child had just identified 18th century medical equipment and explained its use with professional precision. He had described the interior life, the emotional life of a healer who died trying to save others during America's deadliest epidemic. The evidence was overwhelming, but the explanation remained impossible. As Dr. Chen's research deepened, a portrait emerged of Nathaniel Thornton not just from historical records, but from Samuel's memories. Thornton had been 34 when he died, unmarried, devoted to his work, known in the community as someone who would treat anyone, regardless of their ability to pay. His sister's letters, preserved in the Historical Society archives, painted him as compassionate, stubborn, and unwilling to abandon his post, even when the epidemic raged. Samuel described this man from the inside. "I didn't have a family of my own," Samuel said during one session. "I thought I would marry someday, but the work was always more important. When people were sick, they needed me. That mattered more than anything else." He spoke about the loneliness of the epidemic, the fear, the exhaustion. Every day, more people came, their skin yellow, their eyes bloodshot. The smell of the sickness was everywhere. I was so tired. My hands shook when I mixed the remedies. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, who would help them? Dr. Chen asked gently, "Do you remember getting sick yourself?" Samuel nodded slowly. "I felt the fever starting. I knew what it meant. I'd seen it too many times. The headache first, then the heat inside, like burning. I tried to keep working. I thought maybe I could fight it, but the fever got worse." His voice became softer. "I remember lying in my bed upstairs. Above the shop, I could hear people knocking on the door below, still needing help, but I couldn't get up anymore. The fever had me. Everything was yellow, the light, the walls, my skin, and I was so thirsty, so hot." Tears slid down his 5-year-old cheeks. "I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not helping the people who still needed me. That was the hardest part. Knowing they were downstairs, sick and desperate, and I couldn't reach them." Rachel and Michael sat frozen, listening to their child describe a death from 230 years ago with the emotional depth of someone who had lived through it. "How did it end?" Dr. Chen asked softly. "The fever took me," Samuel said simply. "I remember the pain stopping, the burning stopped, and then I wasn't in the room anymore. I was floating, watching. I saw my body on the bed. I saw my neighbor come in and find me," she cried. "I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I wasn't in pain anymore, but I couldn't." He looked at Dr. Chen with those ancient eyes, and then I was gone, for a long time, and then I was being born again, and I was Samuel, and I was little again. And I had a new mama and papa, but I still remembered. I still remember. The session ended with everyone emotionally exhausted. Dr. Chen had documented past life memories before, but never with this level of emotional complexity and historical specificity. She arranged one final verification attempt. Through connections at the University of Pennsylvania, she accessed additional archives, including a recently digitized collection of 1,793 epidemic records that hadn't been available to the public until a few years ago. In those records, she found a notation from the city's Emergency Health Committee. It listed apothecaries who had remained in the city during the crisis. Nathaniel Thornton's name appeared with a handwritten note: "Died in service to the sick, found deceased in his lodgings above shop. Had continued treating patients until final illness prevented further work." The Health Committee's report from 1,793 confirmed exactly what Samuel had described: a healer who worked until the illness made it physically impossible to continue, who died alone above his shop while people still sought his help. No one had told Samuel this detail. It existed only in an archived document that had been digitized after Samuel began speaking about his memories. Dr. Chen presented her findings to a small group of consciousness researchers. She was careful. She presented facts. She acknowledged limitations. She offered no definitive conclusions. But she ended with a question that hung in the air. How does a 5-year-old child accurately describe medical practices, emotional experiences, and specific historical details from 1,793 Philadelphia, including details that exist only in recently digitized archives he's never accessed? The evidence suggested something extraordinary, something that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, memory, and identity. Samuel wasn't just reciting historical facts. He was remembering a life, Nathaniel Thornton's life. The life of a healer who gave everything to save others and whose compassion ultimately cost him his own life. Today, Samuel is 7 years old. His memories of being Nathaniel Thornton are beginning to fade, as they often do in these cases. The vivid details blur. The emotional intensity softens. But something remains, a deep, persistent compassion, a fascination with healing that seems to come from somewhere beyond his current life. I don't remember all the herbs anymore. Samuel admits, sometimes I forget what the shop looked like, but I remember how it felt to help someone, to give them medicine and see the relief in their eyes. That feeling is still real. His parents have noticed changes. Samuel shows unusual empathy for sick people. When his grandmother was ill, he sat with her for hours, somehow knowing exactly how to comfort her. When he sees homeless people, he asks his parents if they have medicine, if they're getting help. He has an old soul, Rachel says. That's what everyone tells us, but we know it's more than that. He really is old. He's lived before. He was a healer before. And somehow, that compassion carried forward. Dr. Chen's documentation of Samuel's case has joined a growing body of research on children's past life memories. She presented her findings at a conference on consciousness studies, carefully noting every verified detail, every impossible correlation. The response was divided. Some researchers saw compelling evidence for consciousness beyond the physical brain. Others insisted there must be conventional explanations, cryptomnesia, unconscious exposure to information, elaborate coincidence. But no one could adequately explain how a 5-year-old demonstrated professional-level knowledge of 18th century medicine, accurately described locations and people from 1,793 Philadelphia, and showed emotional responses consistent with having lived through the deadliest epidemic in American history. The evidence remains. Samuel knew things he shouldn't know. He described a life he never lived. He carried forward the compassionate heart of a healer who died 230 years before Samuel was born. Science offers no complete explanation. Memory shouldn't work this way. Knowledge shouldn't transfer across impossible spans of time. Consciousness shouldn't remember what the brain never learned. And yet, Samuel remembered the yellow fever, the desperate patience, the shop on Market Street, the moment of his death, alone above his shop, still hearing people knocking for help below. He remembered being Nathaniel Thornton, and in remembering, he carried forward something essential, not just knowledge, but character, not just memories, but purpose. Perhaps consciousness is more than electrical signals in a brain. Perhaps what we truly are, our compassion, our purpose, our essential self, transcends the physical form that contains us. Perhaps death is not an ending, but a transition, a doorway through which we pass, carrying forward what matters most. Nathaniel Thornton died trying to heal others. Samuel, at 7 years old, shows the same instinct, the same drive to help, to heal, to ease suffering. Is that coincidence, or is that continuity? In Samuel's case, the evidence suggests something profound. The healer's heart survived. The apothecary's compassion found a new life. and a 5-year-old child carried forward memories from 1793. Memories that whisper of consciousness beyond death, identity beyond a single lifetime, and love that transcends the boundaries we think separate one life from another. The yellow fever took Nathaniel Thornton's body, but perhaps it couldn't take his soul. Perhaps that soul found its way back in a child who still remembers the remedies, still feels the call to heal, still carries the compassion that defined a life lived 230 years ago. If this story touched you, if it made you question what you thought you knew about memory, healing, and the continuation of purpose across lifetimes, you're not alone. Every week, we explore another mystery, another child, another impossible memory that challenges everything we understand about life, death, and the nature of the soul. Subscribe to Before This Life. Join thousands of truth seekers in this journey. Because some questions are worth asking, some mysteries deserve our wonder, and some stories need to be heard. What's your theory about Samuel's knowledge? Have you experienced unexplained compassion or calling that seems to come from beyond your current life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's explore this together. This has been Before This Life.